All right, in this video, we're going to talk about forms and spacing. And so I'll start off with forms and we'll get to what spacing is. So forms is pretty easy. If I look here, eventually I'll find a forms overview. And if I scroll down here enough, then this gives me a vision of what a full form will look like. And if I look at the code, there's a form tag. Here's the button tag we looked at a moment ago. So there's our button, which we can alter as we saw in the last video. And then you'll notice that each label and input is grouped with this div tag. So this div tag has, in this case, form-check. These have these weird MB3s, which I'll talk about in a moment, but let's look at the form. That's not form related, that is box model related. So we'll look at that. MB foreshadowing is margin bottom. So we'll look at that. So each of these labels and inputs are grouped together with a div. And each of these labels has something specific like class equals form label or class equals form control. So if we were to look at what those are doing, let's go down here to form control and we can see a specific example of what a form control might look like. So here we have, and we can piecemeal this, break these things up and make them what we need. So here's one with an email address. You know what label 4 is. We've done that. So you can put your own code in. Remember, label 4 needs to match the ID. This is the only part of this that's Bootstrap related. It's a form label. This particular one has a form control. And if you weren't sure what all of that looked like, you could just put it into a page. And so I'll just put it into this document that we've created earlier. And I'm going to use that box model in a minute. So I'm going to just put this div in and take a peek and see what it looks like. And excellent. So what if we took off some of these classes? You can sort of see what it looks like. What is this going to do? Form control. So that makes our control look very stylized. There's what an HTML form looks like. And so here's what with form control, it stylizes that and makes it look really nice. So I would encourage you to explore the different form controls that are available. You can see a select box here, and you have the ability to manipulate that select box. That's all HTML. And so just utilizing, again, it's all class driven, right? This class is form select. That's what's helping you stylize your form control, your select box. ARIA label, anytime you see anything ARIA related, that again has to do with a screen reader that's trying to ascertain what this tag is for somebody who's listening to it rather than able to see it. So ARIA is simply somebody that has challenges looking at our website. That's for a screen reader. So the rest of this is all HTML. So check and radio boxes, input groups, and so forth. So you can play around with these different ones. And again, just experiment with the code that you're provided, and you have enough skills to be able to know how to manipulate that. So let's do this MB3 and see what that's all about. So if I scroll down here to spacing, there it is. This determines what M and P and all of that stands for. So M stands for margin. Great. P stands for padding. And then MB would be margin bottom. So we saw an MB-3, which means margin bottom. We have margin left and right. You have margin top and bottom. Or if you leave off any of these sections, then you just have margin or padding all the way around. So that seems comfortable. But let's talk about this -1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 and what it's referring to here in the documentation, which may or may not be otherwise obvious. So I'm going to start with 3, but I'm going to go sideways here and bring you into W3 Schools and remind you, if you haven't already encountered it, that there's different lengths that's available. In other words, we're probably pretty comfortable with utilizing pixels. Some of you might have used percentages and those types of things, all perfectly valid, but not very flexible. And so you have these relative lengths. And the purpose of relative lengths is exactly that. It's relative to the default of the browser. In other words, a font might be 16 pixels. If I hard coded it to 16 pixels, it's going to look great in a desktop. But 16 pixels is going to look rather large in a mobile application. And so you might use percentages, so that way that font size will be more flexible to the changing width of the viewport. Or you can use this measurements that are depicted here. And I'm going to talk about the REM measurement here. REM measurements is relative to font size of the root element. And what does that mean? Well, let's look at this document that I put together here for you. I'm going to take out the, I guess I'll leave it there. Let's look at the box model. So in the box model, I have simply a paragraph, and I'm going to look at that paragraph with my inspector tool. So if I click on paragraph, what I want you to see is I have not defined the font size for that at all. So what is the default? The browser has defaults that it's rendering this font size. And if I look here in computed, it's telling me that that font size is 16 pixels. So that's the root. That is the root font size default for the browser that I'm viewing that in. If you look at a phone, it's probably, I don't know what it is offhand, but it's probably going to be 8, for example. So that's the default of this browser in the desktop. Okay, so why is that relevant? Well, let's look back at spacing again. Remember, we had M, B, and then we had 3. Even though it's not very clearly defined here, 3 is the default. Whatever the default REM is what -3 is going to be. Let me prove that. All right, so we have, well, let's just see what we have here. We had a margin bottom on our div class, right? MB3. So let's look at that. So I'm clicking on the MB3, and let's look at our layout at our box model, and we can see that the margin bottom is 16. Okay, so let me flash back here. MB3 means margin bottom default REM, which is relative to the font size of the root element. And we decided that, let me go into computed so I can put those all together. So if we look here, we see that the font size is 16 and the margin bottom is also 16 in this scenario. Okay, so I could put my cursor over it and also see that that's in fact the case with my highlighting, right? Okay, so let's look at another one then. Now that we know what the 3 is, let's look at this one. This one says that it's going to be a half of the REM. So our default REM was 16. So let's give this a margin bottom of 2. So we're going to look back at our class here, not that one, this one, which is margin bottom 2. And let's see what happens. Now our margin bottom is 8. Relative to the font size, REM, of font size is 16, we're going to be at half. So MB.5, what did I do? Sorry, MB2 is half of the default. So this would be 1.5 and 3. So utilizing these spacing tools makes it quick and easy to give you margin bottom, padding, top, bottom, etc. And just remember that 3 would be the default and 5 is half and a quarter, etc. So that's what those measurements mean when we look at our form elements. So now we've seen a form, and we've seen in that form we were presented, let me go back to the form here. We were presented with some classes that we might not have recognized before. And so my idea then was to try and show you what some of those classes meant. For example, here is a class with an MB3. So that's going to give this div a margin bottom of 1 REM. What we saw was being 16, the relative measurement of the font size of the browser that's rendering that element.